Welcome to Talk Tickers. Today we are diving deep into the Royal Gold Q1 2025 earnings call. And well, it looks like they had a pretty standout quarter.
Oh, absolutely. Record earnings, actually. $113 million reported. That's $1.72 per share.
Wow, okay. Record earnings.
Yeah. And even if you adjust for some discrete tax items, the adjusted earnings were still really strong, came in at $100 million or 1.51 per share.
And revenue, I saw that was up too.
Big time. Up 30% compared to last year, hitting $193 million.
So what was really pushing that? What were the main drivers there?
It really came down to strong metal prices. I mean, gold was up, 38%, silver up 37%, and even copper saw a nice bump, up 11%.
Right, those macro tailwinds really helping.
Definitely.
And it looks like they're sharing the love with shareholders too. Dividend increase.
Yep, they boosted the dividend 12.5% year over year. It's now $0.45 per share. And, you know, this is the 24th year in a row they've increased it.
24 consecutive years. That's quite a track record.
It really speaks to the consistency of their model.
Any other big moves, portfolio changes, anything like that?
Yeah, a couple of things. They fully paid back that Rainy River Advanced stream deposit.
Okay, so that's off the books, recovered.
Exactly. And they also bought some more exposure, an additional stream interest in the Aventina area. That was a $50 million deal with Arrow Copper. Seems like a pretty prospective area.
Interesting. So spending some money, but how's the balance sheet holding up with all this?
Looks really solid. They ended the quarter with $1.25 billion in liquidity and, importantly, zero debt.
Zero debt. That gives them a lot of flexibility.
For sure.
Okay, so record earnings, big revenue jump. Let's maybe unpack that revenue number a bit more. Where did the $193 million come from?
Well, gold is still the king, making up about 75% of the total revenue.
Right.
But what was interesting this quarter was the royalty revenue. That really surged, up about 53%, hitting $71 million.
53%. What drove that?
Mostly strong performance from Penasquito and Robinson.
Exactly.
Plus, they got some contributions from newer assets coming online, too.
Okay, and the other side of their business, the streaming side, how did that look? Maybe just quickly remind folks what a stream is.
Sure. So a stream is basically where Royal Gold pays upfront for the right to buy a certain percentage of a mine's future metal production, but at a fixed lower price.
Got it.
And stream revenue was also up about 19% to $122 million. That was mainly higher gold sales from Pueblo Viejo and gold and copper from Mount Milligan.
Okay.
Although that was offset a little bit by lower sales from Xavantina.
Right. Okay, let's maybe zoom in on some of those key assets then. Mount Milligan, what's the latest there?
So the operator, Centerra, they kept their 2025 production guidance the same, looking for 165,000 to 185,000 ounces of gold and 50 to 60 million pounds of copper.
Okay.
But they did mention it's weighted towards the second half of the year.
So that typical lag we see with Royal Gold's results.
Exactly. Because of that sort of 6-month delay between mine production and their sales recognition, Royal Gold probably won't see the benefit of that stronger second half until the first half of 2026.
Makes sense. Any news on like expanding things at Mount Milligan, improving output?
Yeah, Centerra is actually doing a pre-feasibility study right now. They're looking at maybe boosting the mill capacity by about 10% and also improving metal recovery.
Oh, interesting. When might we see that study?
Expected in Q3 this year. So, you know, that could be a pretty significant thing for future revenue if it moves forward.
Definitely want to watch. What about Andacollo? I saw their guidance looked quite different.
Yeah, big change there. The operator, Czech, massively increased their gold production guidance for 2025. They're now saying 35,000 to 39,000 ounces.
Wow, compared to what, last year?
Last year was only about 20,800 ounces. So yeah, a huge jump.
And why the increase?
Mostly better water availability. It means they can run more ore through the mill, increase the throughput.
Okay. And again, the lag effect means Royal Gold sees this later.
Probably, yeah. Likely see the impact hit their numbers towards the end of 2025.
Okay. Pueblo Viejo, always a big one for them. What's happening there?
Well, Barrick, the operator, they're sticking with their 2025 gold guidance for their share, the 410K ounce range. That's despite having a 35-day shutdown recently.
A shutdown. What was that for?
They called it debottlenecking work on the expanded plant, basically trying to improve the efficiency and flow.
Right, ironing out the kinks.
Exactly. They're also making progress on ventilation at the Gold Rush deposit, which should help them mine at higher rates. And exploration keeps looking pretty good, too.
And that big mine extension project. still moving forward.
Yep, seems to be progressing. Focus is on housing resettlement and getting the engineering done for a new tailings facility.
Tailings, right, where the mine waste goes.
Yeah, that new facility is aiming for commissioning in late 2029, so still a ways out, but progressing.
Okay. Penasquito. It sounded like a strong start there.
It was. They hit some really high grades in the Penasquito pit, so gold production was strong in Q1. Co-products were steady, too.
But is that expected to continue?
They actually flagged a shift for the second half, expecting less gold but higher silver, lead, and zinc production. So the metal mix will change a bit.
Got it. What about some of the other maybe development stage assets, like Cobre Panama or those I-80 projects in Nevada?
Sure. At Cobre Panama, the operator MMG gave silver guidance for 2025, 1.3 to 1.5 million ounces. They've started some early work on the expansion, but actual construction, that depends on a feasibility study and wouldn't likely start until 2026.
Okay. And Nevada, I-80.
Yeah, they've got a couple of projects there. Royal Gold has interests in Granite Creek. They're ramping up underground production. And Ruby Hill, which has a couple of components, Archimedes and Mineral Point.
Any solid timelines or production targets yet?
There are preliminary numbers out there for potential production and mine life for both underground and open pit scenarios at those sites. We should get updated, more detailed feasibility studies for Granite Creek later this year, Q4.
Okay. And there's that new royalty coming online soon, right?
Right.
Back River.
Yeah, Back River in Nunavut, operated by B2 Gold. First gold pour is expected this quarter, actually, Q2 2025.
And Royal Gold stake.
Their initial royalty rate is 0.7%. B2 Gold's targeting around 300,000 ounces a year for the first 6 years, so it should be a nice contributor. But they're also looking at potentially increasing the mill throughput there, too.
Lots going on. One more asset, Xavantina. Any updates on the stream terms there?
Yes, there's a key threshold coming up. Once they hit 49,000 ounces delivered under the stream, the cash price Royal Gold pays for the gold bumps up from 20% a spot to 40% a spot.
I know they're close.
Very close. They were at about 46,500 ounces at the end of March. So yeah, expect that change pretty much any time now, likely this quarter. There was also another recent deal that extends the threshold for the current 25% stream rate slightly longer.
Okay, interesting nuance there. Let's shift back to the financials, maybe beyond just the top line revenue.
Yeah.
How did costs look? G&A.
G&A was actually down slightly, lower corporate costs, and their cash G&A, as a percentage of revenue, stayed really low, around 4%.
That's pretty efficient.
It is. And DD&A, depreciation, depletion, amortization, that also decreased.
Why was that?
Couple of reasons. Lower depletion rates in the stream segment because of some reserve increases, apparently, and also just lower gold sales or production at certain assets compared to last year. The unit DD&A was $488 per GEO versus $539 a year ago.
Okay. And interest expense, you mentioned no debt.
Right. So interest and other expenses were way down, mainly because they had less drawn on their credit facility compared to last year.
Makes sense. What about taxes? You mentioned those discrete items affecting the reported earnings.
Yeah, so the overall tax expense was lower because of those specific, likely one-time tax benefits. But if you strip those out, the effective tax rate was about 19.4%.
And how does that compare to their guidance?
Right in the middle. Their full-year guidance range is 17% to 22%, so 19.4% fits comfortably within that.
So putting it all together, bottom line, cash flow.
Well, net income, as we said, hit that record, $113.5 million, 1.72 per share. Adjusted net income was also very strong, $99.8 million, their second highest ever.
And cash from operations.
That actually dipped slightly, mainly because they paid higher cash taxes this quarter, but that was partly offset by, the higher cash coming in from the actual metal sales.
Okay, so looking ahead, did they change their outlook for the rest of 2025? Any updated guidance?
No, they kept everything the same. Metal sales guidance, DD&A, tax rate range, all maintained from their previous forecast.
But they acknowledge the uncertainty out there.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned, the uncertain economic conditions, potential market volatility, but they really emphasized their stability. They pointed to their leverage to gold prices, which have been strong, their diversified portfolio, that really strong balance sheet with no debt, and of course the dividend commitment, kind of their core strengths playing out.
Right, the core value proposition. Any changes on the board or leadership?
Just one mention. Kevin McArthur is set to retire from the board at the next stockholder meeting.
Okay, so stepping back, if you're an investor processing all this, what are the main takeaways from this quarter for Royal Gold?
I think the results really underscore the strength of that royalty and streaming model, especially when gold prices are rising. They get that upside exposure without taking on the direct mining risks and costs.
Yeah, you see that benefit clearly here.
Exactly. And that dividend increase, that's a pretty strong signal from management about their confidence in future cash flows.
So what should people be watching going forward?
Definitely keep an eye on progress at those key assets, particularly Mount Milligan and Pueblo Viejo. They're going to be major drivers. That potential mill expansion study at Mount Milligan due in Q3, that could be a big long-term catalyst.
And Pueblo Viejo, specifically the silver aspect.
Yeah, that's key. If they can successfully sort out the debottlenecking and improve silver recovery later this year and into 2026, that could be a really nice boost. All that deferred silver represents, potential upside waiting to be unlocked.
Right.
And finally, just notice their corporate development activity. They're not just sitting back, they're actively looking to increase exposure to existing assets, like with Aventina, and presumably looking for new deals too. The market for mining transactions seems pretty busy, so that could present opportunities for them.
Okay, makes sense. Right, let's switch gears now to our slightly more speculative segment. This is not financial advice. Got any outrageous but plausible trade ideas based on this call?
Okay, idea number one. Thinking about Pueblo Viejo and that expected ramp up in silver production later this year, maybe into 2026, plus all those deferred ounces. Well, one, let's call it creative idea, might be to look at a long position in maybe a silver ETF, or perhaps a specific silver miner that has a lot of leverage to the silver price. The thinking is, if Pueblo Viejo really delivers on that silver recovery, Royal Gold's silver revenue goes up, and this could be an indirect way to play that theme.
Interesting angle. But the usual caveats apply.
Absolutely. Disclaimer, this is definitely not financial advice.
Yeah.
The timing, the amount of silver recovery, that's all subject to operational hurdles, market prices, you name it, lots of risk there.
Understood. Okay, what's outrageous idea number two?
All right, this one focuses on Royal Gold's strong balance sheet and their stated interest in maybe making acquisitions if the market gets choppy.
Okay.
So the idea could be something like pairing a long position in Royal Gold itself with maybe short positions in a few select mining companies, specifically miners that are maybe less diversified, more dependent on a single asset, and have higher operational risk.
So the thesis is, if things get tough, Royal Gold buys cheap assets, while the single asset guys struggle.
Kind of. The idea is Royal Gold could potentially snag some undervalued assets in a downturn, boosting their long-term value, while those more vulnerable miners face headwinds. It's a relative value kind of play based on potential M&A.
Definitely fits the outrageous but plausible bill. And the disclaimer.
Disclaimer, again, not financial advice. M&A is super unpredictable. Nobody knows if or when deals will happen, and market conditions can flip really fast. Pure speculation here.
Got it. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive on the Royal Gold Q1 2025 earnings call.
Yeah, we hit the key financials, the operational updates across their pretty diverse portfolio, and touched on what it might mean for investors.
Hopefully this analysis gave you a clearer view of what's happening with Royal Gold and what drove those record results.
So what stood out to you from all this? Anything we didn't cover that you're wondering about? As always, we absolutely encourage you to dig deeper and do your own research.
That's right. Join us next time on Talk Tickers for another in-depth look into the world of earnings.